Hi, I'm Circe Olson Woessner, the founder of the Museum of the American Military Family, and this is our podcast, Host Nation Hospitality. This podcast is part of a series of programs made in collaboration with the Amis in McGraw Kaserne, and that's an exhibit in conjunction with the Munich Stunde Null 80th anniversary commemoration event. And so for our listeners and our viewers, because this is both video and audio, I'm going to interview students. And so today I'm happy to be talking to Dave Flick, who went to college and at McGraw Kaserne at the Munich campus, but also worked there. And so we're going to have a good conversation. We're going to discuss not only Munich campus, but also Brathood and just a little bit of a lot of things. So hi, Dave.
Hi, sounds great. Very excited
Yeah.
to be a part of this and appreciate the invite.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think the last time I saw you was like 1981 or something.
It might have been Circe.
A long time ago. Um, so when did you attend the University of Maryland?
I actually started in 1977
Mm.
through 79, but I had the fortune of going 5 semesters.
Ah.
So it was a 2-year school, of course. It would have normally been 4, but between I think missing some credits,
Mhm.
I convinced my parents to let me stay for another semester. So I went 5 semesters.
Wow. Wow. And then you worked too.
And then I worked, yes, for the University of Maryland
Mhm.
as a bartender in the student union, which we called the Keller. And
Mhm.
I think, as you know, that was in a basement, and it was a perfect scenario. It was a former firing range that they
Mhm.
had converted into a student union area on the base.
Wow. Well, I was there from 1979 to 1981. So I did just my time and then I transferred out. So for the purpose of this podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about the military and the family culture.
Yeah.
I know you're a brat. And then also to give some of our audience who may not know what military life is all about, a little bit of taste of that. So we'll start with that and then we'll move on. So as you know, the military has its own culture, as do military brats and spouses. And so when I introduce myself for my work as the director of the Museum of the American Military Family, I always identify myself as like a military wife and not a military, and a military mom, and then an overseas brat. And it seems that I need to just put out my identity right away, and so that people know what context I'm coming from. Do you still identify as a brat? How do you?
Yes, the word brat I don't use because civilians don't identify with that word other than a misbehaving child.
Right.
So I'll identify myself as a military family member. My father was a naval aviator, so he flew jets off aircraft carriers.
Mm-mm,
A lot of times, because it is so culturally specific,
mm-mm,
I'll talk about the fact that I rarely lived in any one place for more than 3 or 4 years.
mm-mm,
I was born in California, but at the age of 6, moved across country as my father was Navy.
mm-mm,
He went to flight school in Pensacola, where my sister was born, and that's in Florida for our viewers. Then
mm-mm,
we moved over to California, where he was assigned to an aircraft carrier.
mm-mm,
I was born in San Diego, but
mm-mm,
then we would have another duty station in Northern California. And then from there, we moved to Virginia.
mm-mm,
And
mm-mm.
in Virginia, we were 4 years in Virginia Beach at the Naval Air Base there, and then over to Norfolk. But then my father was assigned to Naples, Italy, as a part of NATO,
Uh,
the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And
right.
so I ended up going to high school, or actually from the 8th grade through graduation in Naples, Italy. And it was in Naples, Italy that I first found out about the University of Maryland. As a matter of fact, in my senior year of high school, I was invited by a friend to come up for Oktoberfest. So I wasn't even a student yet. and got to come up and visit. And
Mm.
I will tell you that it was so much fun.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
don't mind sharing this. I overstayed. I was supposed to have come back after, I think, 4 or 5 days.
Mhm.
And nearly 2 weeks later, of course, back then communication was completely different. My
Right.
parents didn't know what was going on. Next thing I know, I have Interpol looking for me.
Oh my gosh.
Suffice it to say, I make my way back to Naples, and with a little bit of pain, but ended up. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking getting a little blurry there. Ended up,
I bet you were then too, huh?
yes, but it was clear that the University of Maryland was a wonderful choice because since I'd arrived in Europe at 13, I was so acclimated and quite frankly wanted to continue on. And
Mhm.
so I started at the University of Maryland in 1977. But back to being a brat, it's one of the things that I share quickly, being a part of a military upbringing,
Mhm.
in particular because while everyone may be familiar with having a US military, they're
Mhm.
not that familiar with what the life of a military family member is like.
That's right.
We're always the new kid at school, but we've always been the new kid, and everyone else in our military schools, anyway, have
Mhm.
always been the new kid. But of course, until I went overseas, I was going to local schools,
Right.
which meant I was always the new kid in places where people didn't move.
Right.
But it,
Right.
it really drives in us a sense of being able to cope with
Mhm.
many, many different scenarios,
Mhm.
being able to talk with different people easily, being comfortable in different places because you are moving around so much. So, to get back to your question, as a part of my story, one
Mhm.
of the first things I bring up is being a part of a military family. And a lot of times that's in the context of not knowing my extended family
Right.
because I left the United States at 13. I also left all of my extended family back in the United States. I
Right.
didn't come back to the States, by the way, until I was 31.
Wow. Okay. Well, hold that thought
All
because
right.
I think we're going to have more follow-up on all of this. Um,
Okay.
but I do want to tell you I have a similar. So my parents had to go to Munich when I was a senior in high school, and they had a friend whose kid went to Munich. I don't even remember who the kid was. But at any rate, I ended up going to a party while my parents were off doing whatever they were doing. And I was like, oh, I like this place. I'm going to come back to go to
Yeah.
college there. So yeah, I didn't stay weeks. I stayed maybe 3 hours, but it was enough to make me realize that, hey, I should probably come to the University of Maryland. Okay, back to this. I think the whole Interpol thing is hysterical. But let's continue that. So, some kids, as kids, at least I felt like I had a role to play, and I know other military kids have said they have to play this role. You feel like you're representing the family and your dad or your mom and then the United States, this whole big thing. Like you're living under a microscope and then you're being judged by the military. Or did you feel like you had a role to play, or that you were subject to scrutiny, or that you'd get your dad in trouble, like Interpol? I mean, I wouldn't imagine that was something that made him happy to have to call Interpol.
No, as a matter of fact, and sorry, Circe, I see that I'm getting, there we go. There we go. Okay. So I think everyone is schooled, all military, what we call military dependents,
Mhm.
the children of active duty service people, be it the father or the mother, are told about you are representing not only our family, but
Mhm.
you're representing the United States.
Mhm.
Now, certainly, as you go abroad, that microscope becomes even more clear
Mhm.
because now you're in a very isolated American community
Mhm.
amongst local nationals.
Mhm.
And so it not only had to do with your family's reputation, but potentially with your parents' career.
Right, right.
the military machine is very political in nature. It's something I didn't really concern myself with at the time, but as an adult, I think I became much more aware of the politics around being in the military
Mhm.
and how everything from promotions to duty stations and whatnot were considered.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you wanted to represent yourself, you wanted to represent your country, you wanted to really represent your own nationality, if you will, within that foreign country.
Oh, right. Um, so, we're talking about military culture and how we towed the line because it could affect our parents' careers. What kind of things now, looking back, like you're talking about, looking back, what are things that you consider to be completely normal that civilian people would think is totally not normal?
Well, there was behavior when you were on a base
Mhm.
versus behavior when you were off a base.
Mhm.
On base, for example, there were two times where if you were on a base,
Mhm.
all cars would stop.
Mhm.
Everyone would exit their vehicles with their hands on their hearts, facing an American flag,
Mhm.
both in the morning and in the evening,
Mhm.
for the not the Pledge of Allegiance, but the Star Spangled Banner
Right, right, right.
that you would hear. So on base was very interesting because as a dependent, you would know exactly where you could go, where you could not go. I think you were more aware of your behavior because you were in this microcosm, if
Mhm.
you will.
Mhm.
Now, going off base as a representative, I will tell you, for my part, especially in both in Italy and in Germany,
Mhm.
acclimating with the local culture was
Mhm.
very important to me. In
Mhm.
Italy, for example, we lived there was no base housing.
Mhm.
And for your audience, when you're at some bases, you can be put on base housing. And I think in Munich, you may have been living in Perlacher Forest,
Right, right,
which was base housing.
right.
But in Naples, there was no base housing. So you're living out on the economy, which
Mhm.
means you're very easily able to acclimate with the local nationals or the
Right,
Italians or
right,
the
right,
Germans.
right, right.
Um, and and in doing so, you're not only being exposed to their culture and looking to, I always look to assume some of their culture, but also to share your own. One
Mhm.
short story is I had some of my Italian friends over at my house.
Mhm.
Now, in Italy, at the time, they didn't eat peanut butter, but I was making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And
Mhm.
one of my Italian friends wanted to taste peanut butter, so I gave him a spoonful of peanut butter. Well, you can just imagine what he looked like. He didn't know how to navigate with the viscosity
Yeah.
of peanut butter. Now,
Uh-huh.
the next thing I did, the only thing for me that ever cut through peanut butter was milk. And Italians didn't really drink milk like Americans do. So I
Mhm.
hand him this glass of milk, which he looks at, because I don't think in Italy at the time they had pasteurized milk.
Mhm.
Um, but anyway, that was just an example of how these cultures can come together and how, as a representative of the United States and of military families,
Mhm.
this back and forth, you start to learn that they don't even weren't eating peanut butter or weren't drinking milk, or
Mhm.
that corn in southern Italy was only used for one thing, was feeding animals. So they were a bit confused as to why we were having corn on the cob.
Oh,
Now
yeah.
let's go up to Germany.
Um,
Munich just being such an amazing city in and of itself.
mhm.
McGraw Kaserne, like
Mhm.
any base, having that own microcosm. But once you stepped off, it wasn't going to a grocery store. It was going to the butcher, the baker,
Right.
all of the different stores. It's acclimating to that culture.
Mm,
When you go in, it's a lot of it is learning the language. So I ended up speaking fluent Italian,
mm,
and even Neapolitan dialect. And on the German side, I took German in school. I'd taken German in high school for 2 years.
mm.
Getting to Germany, realizing that I might as well have never taken it at all.
Right,
It
right.
was only once you were able to immerse yourself in the German culture, or myself, that
Mm.
I was able to start learning German.
Right,
Which
right.
now, by the way, I recently took my sons and my wife to Oktoberfest,
Oh,
went to the Kaserne. I wanted to show them where I went to college. We drove to Heidelberg, where I had met their mother.
mm-mm.
But German came back so easily to me.
I found that out too, because, we just moved back to Germany and I hadn't spoken German seriously in like, I don't, 30 some years. And we went into the local bakery and I'm like, ich möchte ein Stück Brot haben and da da da. I was like, ooh, that was pretty cool. That just comes
Yes,
out.
and it just comes out.
Yeah,
One of
yeah.
my favorite phrases that I learned early on, by the way,
Hmm.
meinst du das oder sagst du das nur sowieso?
What? What?
Okay. Now, if you
Uh,
say that, most Germans will think that you're a German speaker. Do you mean that? Or are you just saying it? You
mm-mm,
know?
mm-mm.
Sowieso.
Yeah, really. I'm because I find myself saying little things that are just something that I grew up with. Na ja, it's
Ja,
like
ja.
what? Na ja, what? Um, so I have my own little story, and and this goes back to kind of things that other people might think strange. My parents entertained a lot. I imagine your parents did too, because
Yes.
your dad was, so even as young as 11 or 12, I was serving hors d'oeuvres and pouring wine at my parents' parties, and I prided myself on knowing how to twist the bottle so that it didn't run out and spill on the glass or drip. And then years later, I was telling this to somebody in the States, and she was like, that was an inappropriate childhood you had, So were there things that you did in the line of duty that would now be considered inappropriate?
So it's interesting that you bring this up, and for your audience, I think that they could benefit from understanding
Mm,
the differences between whether your parent, whether your active duty parent was an officer
mhm,
or an enlisted person.
mhm,
So my father happened to be an officer in the United States Navy.
mhm,
And so you will have a responsibility, if you will, in within that culture to
mhm,
entertain and entertain fairly regularly. As a
mhm,
matter of fact, I will tell you that both my brother and my sister and I loved when my parents entertained, because it meant that after the party was over, there was going to be lots of snacks and
mhm,
sodas. At the time, for example, in Italy, soda was way expensive.
mhm,
And so we didn't have it very often.
mhm,
Uh, but entertaining was a regular thing. I will tell you that my role in terms of entertainment was essentially to behave myself,
mhm,
to speak when spoken to.
mhm,
Of course, you always want to look nice, and you're prepared to meet people that you've never seen before
mhm,
and engage with them.
mhm,
Um, but but the culture lends itself to preparing you from the time you're born, if in fact you're born into a military family versus coming in as a even a teenager.
mhm,
This is a part of who you are. You know how to operate within a social scenario with people that you've not only not met before, but may never see again. Um, it was, I would say, for my part, the social engagements were more formal
mhm,
than casual.
mhm, mhm.
Rather than cookouts, they were dinner parties.
Right, right.
Um, but of course, we also have, with every military installation, there's a heavy emphasis on recreation. And so you'd go to recreation areas where there were large outdoor parties, barbecues, that type of thing. Did I do anything then or have to do anything then that might be considered inappropriate today? I would say no, because once again, when you're thinking about formal scenarios, I think probably many, if not all of the same rules apply today to formal
Right,
scenarios.
right. Um, so getting back to thinking along those lines, I always thought there was some sort of a sense of esprit de corps when we were living overseas. I was a military wife, so there was a lot of esprit de corps. Do you feel that there are special bonds and connections between military kids that civilians may or may not get? Like, we're always seeking each other out, and 40 years later we're still talking to each other even though we haven't seen each other since 1981. So do you think there's some special bond between military?
There is an amazing bond. There's a couple of things. This might sound a bit strange. Imagine if all military active duty and their families were purple. Okay.
Okay.
You would easily be able to see who they were, no matter where you traveled in the world.
Right.
They're military. Because you don't see that. It comes up in conversation. As a matter of fact, right now, I live in a small town in central Massachusetts, 5,000 people. I'm on Facebook. This is about 8 years ago. And I'm posting on my high school, my Forest Sherman High School page. All of a sudden, I get a hit saying, David, you live in Barrie? Yes, I live in Barrie. This is someone that went to high school in Naples, Italy. And by the way, there's no military installations near me, no large ones at all in central Massachusetts, or even in western Massachusetts. There's a Westover Air Force Base. But here we are, and we find ourselves out in this small country town, and when you see each other, I didn't really know her in high school. She was much younger than me. But you have a bond immediately,
Right.
that you don't have with anyone else. And it comes with common experience.
Right.
Because no one else in this town, there are I play bocce at our VFW, which is Veterans of Foreign Wars. So other military members. And only when you talk about experiences do you have this sense of commonality, this sense of belonging, this sense of bond. And I can go, by the way, anywhere in the world I have traveled. I have friends. It is something that my wife, this is my second marriage. My wife is from this small town. And for her, the idea of not being born and being raised and living in the same town all your life is such a foreign concept. As a matter of fact, she's fascinated with my upbringing and my life experiences in the same way that I'm fascinated with hers. She has a huge family here, relations that just go wide and deep. But I have taken her to high school reunions. I've taken her to University of Maryland reunions, and she's fascinated with the kind of people we are, how engaging everyone is, how transparent everyone is.
Right.
Because sharing your life experiences is a matter of the way that you engage no matter where you are.
Yeah.
So absolutely, even you, Circe. So when I hear your name, I reference memories of you at the college, and there's an immediate bond there. And
Right.
that will happen no matter where you are in the world, no matter who you meet. And it doesn't, by the way, it is not limited to someone being at the school the same years you were. It's
Mm-hmm.
anyone that went to the University of Maryland, we can have a conversation with.
That's
Anyone that went to my high school, same
that's
thing.
that's what the teachers said. I interviewed some of the staff yesterday, the faculty from University of Maryland, and they said the same thing. When they hear somebody went to the University of Maryland, their eyes light up, their ears perk up. It's like, ooh, okay, and I think that is true. And so it is an esprit de corps, it is a bond. And I was
Yes.
and it was kind of neat how easy everybody was yesterday talking. They knew each other, and then it was a free flowing conversation that felt natural. I didn't feel like I was, interviewing. Um, Getting back to life on the military base for a minute, and each military installation is different. It's got its own flavor, but they're all similar in the sense that they're small contained cities. They
Yes.
behind the fence, there's everything you could possibly want to survive and have an American lifestyle, like shopping centers and churches and sports complexes, libraries and healthcare. And so all of us kids growing up had access to healthcare and had access to support services. And we had the opportunity to join clubs like the what we called them, the AYA or the DYA, or other youth programs. What kind of programs? Now, when you were a little kid growing up, what programs were you involved in?
So when I was living on base, it's still when I was quite young. When we moved to Virginia, I was 6. So 6 to 13, I'm living off base and in the community.
Mhm.
Now, I will tell you the way that I wasn't a part of military programs at that point,
Mhm.
but I would go, I was a big sailor, my father being in the Navy. And so we would get on in Norfolk, Virginia, is where I first sailed on my own for the first time. Imagine me in a small sailboat. Now, where I'm sailing, if I look to my left, I'm seeing aircraft carriers,
Mhm.
destroyers, which to an average person might be
Weird.
amazing, but to me, it's very normal, right? I'm in amongst all of these wartime, if you will,
Mhm.
vessels.
Mhm.
Now, when I went over to Italy, I'm 13. I'm just getting acclimated. They would always have youth programs. For example, I got on a soccer team.
Mhm.
Um, that was when I found, and I was a tall, kind of skinny kid, very blonde, uh,
Mhm.
and and I say very blonde because if you go to any Latin countries, that's a sign of good luck. And
Mhm.
Italian women would always want to touch my hair. Um, but anyway, I
No,
digress.
I remember your hair. It was long and blonde
Yeah,
and
yeah,
curly.
yeah. I just heard my doorbell, which means someone's coming in, so I'm going to close this door just a second.
Okay.
All right. Um, in Naples, the sports programs, we had our own dedicated military sports facilities. So there were baseball fields, soccer fields, football fields. Through your school, there were all different kinds of clubs. I was in the drama club. I was in little theater on base. I was in soccer. We played baseball. Um, but it's kind of where you would go, not only to play your sport, but also where you'd go on your leisure time because it was a connection point, if you will. And by the way, it was only Americans
Mhm.
were allowed in. Uh, Point of interest, this place called Carney Park, which was the sports facility
Mhm.
in Naples, was actually inside an extinct volcano. So you
Whoa.
would drive through the side of it. There
Mhm.
was an 18-hole golf course, Olympic pool, drive-in movie theater, probably 9 baseball fields, tennis courts, camping, anything you could imagine. As a matter of fact, this is where kids would learn how to drive because there was a huge loop
Mm,
around the side. So we definitely, everything was set up to support the
mm,
military family. And now that I say that, the military family, we just went through Memorial Day, of
mm,
which, by the way, my small town where I live today, it brings me to tears every year
mm,
because people turn out for their fallen military members in small towns
mm,
like I have never seen in
mm,
larger cities. Even the town that called Shrewsbury that I moved from out to the country. The people here, because it's smaller, everybody knows one another, which
mm,
means that when someone dies in battle, whether it was Korea, Vietnam, even we just had put up a 9/11 memorial in this town.
mm,
People show up for the
mm,
parade, for the eulogies,
mm,
and the military family plays such a vital role. And although I've never been active duty myself,
mm,
the active duty service people I talk to talk about the importance of their family. Many military active duty people in wartime survive because they know what they're coming back to. And
right.
military families know that I would not see my father, for example, during the Vietnam War for anywhere from 6 to 8 months.
Mm,
He'd
mm,
be gone. And
mm,
so you learn to operate as a strong, centric family unit
mm.
minus your active duty sponsor.
Well, that brings me to the next part of my questions, which were called the hard stuff. So you're already starting on that, which is a wonderful segue in because Memorial Day, as a military kid, you grew up knowing your dad could get killed, your dad could deploy. There's a lot of hardship in the military that people don't think about. We think about loss. So when I say military loss, everybody thinks death, ultimate loss. But there's so much more loss in the military family, in military life. So what does loss mean to you?
Loss of opportunity.
Hmm.
So imagine you're a small child growing up and one of your parents simply isn't there.
Hmm.
It's not something you necessarily notice at the time. But as I look back, I look at the amount of days, hours, weeks, months that I would have gotten to spend with my father that
Hmm.
I didn't.
Hmm.
Um, I think also it wartime
Hmm.
changes that military person. For example, it wasn't until my father passed away
Hmm.
that I found out the details of the missions that
Hmm.
he flew. I
Hmm.
have all of his medal. I
Hmm.
have his Navy sword.
Hmm.
But there are many stories that my father chose not to tell or that we didn't have the time to tell,
Hmm.
um, that I learned about after his passing because of letters of reference from superior officers when it came for him to get promotions.
Hmm.
Every medal, I now have the letter that went along with that medal as to how he earned it. I
Hmm.
had no idea, for example, um, just how dangerous his missions were
Hmm.
in Vietnam and
Hmm.
how much um, anti-aircraft fire he was having to fly through.
Hmm.
As a matter of fact, this is they just sunk his aircraft carrier as a reef off the coast of Florida, and
Oh,
I can't wait to go diving on it because they sunk it in water to become a reef, but at a depth where you can go diving. Oh,
oh.
that segues back to I learned how to scuba dive in Naples, Italy, while I was still in high school. Um, but anyway, about loss, I
Mm,
think that most people,
mm,
most kids I know have some degree of, I'm just feeling a bit emotional,
mm, mm,
some degree of hole in
mm,
their heart
mm.
for time that they didn't get to spend. I
Yeah.
wear my father's ring.
Mm, mm,
we got this for him in Italy. We
Mm.
called him the king.
Mm.
So there's a lot of, where I live now, I told you about my wife's family.
Mm.
She's got her parents still alive. We've
Mm.
got 7 grandchildren. We have all of this family around us.
Mm. Mm.
I had none of
Mm.
that family around me.
Yeah.
And even when I did finally come back to the United States, you're not building those relationships as kids. So you don't have them to come back to. You have to make active attempts. So
Mm.
in terms of loss,
Mm.
loss of family, loss of connection. Now, I want to state unequivocally that I
Mm.
would not change a
Right.
thing
Right.
because I absolutely know what I have
Mm.
that I might not have otherwise had.
Right. Yeah, it's tough. The family part. I don't have any real relationships with my cousins. I see we're friends on Facebook, and I was like, I wonder what it would have been like if we'd been able to go to their houses, for the holidays and all that. But I grew up overseas too. It is loss. And I think about as a military spouse, wife, the loss of opportunity, like you mentioned, but for jobs, I always had to, get a new job every few years, um, and so, there is a lot of loss that people don't think about. Losing friends, you moved all the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah. In your opinion, when you think about it, what is the hardest thing about military life then? Is it the loss or is it something else?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I was about to blurt out lack of control. You're
Mm-hmm.
not in control of which friends are going to be in your class the next year. Your
Mm-hmm.
families may have moved. You're
Mm-hmm.
not in control of your own duty station.
Mm-hmm.
These choices that if you were in the States, overseas, you can't drive when you're 16.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine you come over like you did as a senior. You were probably already driving, and
Mm-hmm.
then you get to Europe and you can no longer drive.
Well, that's true. I didn't think about it in that context.
Yeah.
It's
So
interesting.
so so there's not a lot of control. But once again, I think all of these downside or what we're referring to or couching as downsides are
Mm-hmm.
mitigated or balanced out by those things that are upsides.
Those are upsides. Yeah, yeah. So would you recommend a military career to somebody who's just graduating high school or college?
I would app so I myself
Mm-hmm.
never chose the military.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was fairly young. So I was not eligible.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought the one thing about the military there is predictability within the system. The
Mm-hmm.
rules are very defined.
Mm-hmm.
The Not only the social aspects, but the hierarchical aspects of each military branch is very well defined. And I thought if I was in the military,
Mm-hmm.
I would have gamed the system. I would have been fantastic at my job. I would have. The thing about the military is there are benefits at the end of your service
Mm-hmm.
that you don't necessarily appreciate until you leave.
Right.
If you have, my father had his medical paid for, his dental paid for, a pension plan that companies today don't have. There are
Mm-hmm.
things as you exit that once again mitigate the constraints
Mm-hmm.
of while you're in. I think it is a wonderful institution.
Mm-hmm.
I think, for example, one of the things about the military,
Mm-hmm.
discrimination. I was living in Virginia when they first started busing, meaning taking primarily African American students from inner cities, busing them out to the more rural schools, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
There was a tension like nobody's business racially in Virginia for me at the time. But because I was military,
Mm-hmm.
my parents told me, there is no such thing as when I would come home and say, Mom, that colored kid, first thing out of her mouth is, well, what color? You were not allowed to discriminate in the military because the person, regardless of color, is next to you might save your life. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't go on, but the military is a confluence of every color, creed, religion, body shape. It is, if you will, a reflection of America in terms of the diversity that we have, but it's put together in a very different way, because things that might be tolerated or even encouraged in some parts of the United States absolutely are not tolerated and are discouraged within the military system.
Well, we actually did a book on it was called E Pluribus Unum, Grace Under Pressure. And we did a survey and asked people about their experiences in the military and military families around the topics of gender, race, religion, identity, culture, ethnicity. And for the most part, it was people said, most people think that the military is all this way. They all think this way. They all act this way. They all do this. But what you said is absolutely true. The military is made up of people from everywhere, all sorts of people. And most civilians don't see that we really are reflecting the greater democracy in the military. So let's talk about the University of Maryland. Yay, Bouvier, the best.
Okay, you got to tell them what Bouvier is.
The best dorm ever?
Yes, of all the dorms on campus, Bouvier had the most, what should I say?
The coolest people lived
interesting reputation.
Well,
it was the only one with stairwells that from the 4th floor you could ride down all the way to the 1st floor.
Oh, on the railings, right?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I never did that.
It was also when I got to school, by the way, the Bouvier dormitory was, first of all, a barrack. They did not have kitchens. When I got to school, we were doing our dishes in the bathtub and cooking on a hot plate. It was actually later on, I think, when you were there at school, that they'd taken what used to be a single room in that apartment and made it into a kitchen.
I'm trying to remember. We did have a kitchen area. I remember that. I'm trying to think though if we had a stove or if we had hot plates, but we did not wash our dishes in the bathtub for sure. And also because I really have very fuzzy memories. I wasn't a very observant child, but I think I remembered that you could go like from the attic clear through.
Okay, those kitchenettes had doors. Now, originally they were fire doors. So it allowed you to go from one apartment to the adjacent apartment. And if you could get through people's front apartment doors, you could literally walk through the entire building. And those were for fire purposes. Now, another aspect of dormitory life was that when I went to school, when I first started, there were men's dorms. Bouvier was men only. And the other dorms were for girls only. And then I think in my maybe my second year, they started integrating. So you would have guys and girls in different dorms. By the way, having a guys dorm and all the rest girls also set up for some very unique experiences, which meant raiding the girls' dorms and pelting them with snowballs at the first snow, or pushing snow through basement windows, or there was some of this, back and forth. It was kind of fun.
Yes, boys and girls, and I know we were mostly bothered by pesky boys. Yes.
Yes.
Do have a question. Did you apply for any other colleges, or did you just go right for the University of Maryland?
I went right for the University of Maryland. Quite frankly, it's a very interesting thing. A lot of people are only at a duty station for 3, maybe 4 years. My father extended twice in Naples, and they also bought a home in Italy to retire in. So my roots were staying there. I was, getting to Europe at 13. Now probably very European minded, although still very American. So wanting to stay close to my family. Most students, when their parents went back to the States, they went back to the States with them and attended whatever local college there was.
Right.
So my parents were not going back to the States, which made Munich a really good and easy choice for me.
Do they still have the house in Naples?
It was in Assisi, actually.
Oh.
Right outside of Assisi, and that house was destroyed by earthquake.
Oh no.
So they ended up coming back to the States.
So I feel, now I was only there for the 2 years. I feel that those 2 years that I spent at the University of Maryland, Munich campus, were some of the best years of my life. And I said this to the teachers yesterday. I'm like, I peaked at 16, how terrible is that? But, 40 years later, I still think back on that time. It's absolutely magical. And I have to say, we sound like all we did was party, and we didn't. We had great teachers and great academics. So
Yeah.
I want to put that out there. But do you feel that your time in Munich was magical? And
All right, I'm going to make the broad statement of saying, if you're living in a dormitory rather than being a commuter, your time at college, regardless of which college, is probably going to be one of the peaks of your life. But when you go to the University of Maryland, you're not just a campus in a town like in the United States, where even some of the locals, might not really appreciate, a college being there. This microcosm, this being able to retreat out into the local community of Munich and then come back into the safety of campus, made it very special because the school was relatively small. And behaving more like an international college, because if you'll remember, so many servicemen were actually married to a local national. Maybe mom was Italian, mom was Greek, mom was Egyptian, mom was German.
Right.
You have such an international flavor on campus. We had guys coming from the Middle East, my friends Warren, and it was so unique. I'm going to say it was one of the best times in my life. But I'm going to say that the dynamics of why it was one of the best times in my life is hard to reproduce in virtually any other scenario.
Right. Well, first of all, they were military brats. They'd all lived in other places. So they weren't just, from one town. So you had that interesting thing. And then you had, like you said, an international flavor. But you had a very, and you had a group of mostly gregarious people. I don't think I ever met a person that wasn't. And most of the people that I hung out with were very interesting, and they were also very interested in things. And our teachers gave us this opportunity to be ourselves. And if we said something shocking, they encouraged them to find more, we were encouraged to think freely and to explore. And then they spent a lot of time. It was almost like, because if you're in a classroom with only 30 people, your teachers get to know you and your personality, and they can find things to guide you in this direction. I remember all the field trips we went on and the study tours, So did you live in the dorms then when you started?
And I lived in the dorms all 5 semesters, 229 Bouvier, 229.2, and then my last semester I had a single in the top floor.
I had a single on the top floor too. I just went back to Munich and I couldn't remember which dorm I was in. I know. And I'm standing there and I'm like almost crying. It's like I spent some of my best years here and I don't know which door is mine. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. But when you worked there, were you allowed to live in the dorm still, or did you have to move?
Actually, if you'll remember where the Keller entrance was, there was a group of buildings called the Quadrangle.
Okay.
And I lived in an apartment in the Quadrangle. So I was no longer in the dorms, but was working. By the way, I was working for the University of Maryland at night as a bartender, but in the daytime, I was working at the Post Exchange. For those of you not familiar, every base has like a department store. I was working for Bose, doing demonstrations in the audio department in the day.
I do remember you got a job with Bose, but I didn't put the two together. So you never slept. You just worked day and night.
Oh, first of all, both jobs. How fun. I'm demonstrating amazing speakers and stereo to customers, and then serving up beer and wine and soda and water to students at night. You couldn't get any better. And just to put a bow on it, I ended up spending 37 years with Bose and retired about 6 years ago.
Wow. Wow.
And I managed our military business in Europe for 9 years. So was on virtually every military base, and then came back to the United States, managing our military business here for the eastern half of the US, including our bases in Hawaii. So I have been on just about every military installation in the world.
Wow. Well, have you been back to the McGraw Kaserne after you left? Did you ever go back?
Like I say, I think it was 5 years ago. Took my wife and kids. So went on, but because working with Bose, I had gone back to Germany a number of times on business with Bose. I was an global operations manager and would take the drive down to Munich. And one of the first things I noticed is they had taken the statue that was in the fountain over by the girls' dorms, by the tennis courts. They had moved that. So I went and found that. There were just certain kind of memory items from when I was at school that I wanted to make sure I found, but pretty much the base was the base. As a matter of fact, even though it had closed for some time as a military installation, the University of Maryland was still up on the side of the building. And I think to this day, you can still see the outline of those letters on the side of the commissary building.
Yeah. I was, like I said, I was just there and I didn't remember much, and it really made me sad. And so much is gone, and then some of the buildings that are left were like the military buildings. Well, I didn't have anything to do with the military.
Right.
Like, I don't know anything about this. Let me see. So what were you majoring in when you were there?
Sociology.
Uh-huh.
And of course, I look back on it, and I'm like, oh, okay, what did I do that for? But it was just more a part of my nature.
Yeah, I was going to say sociology is good in sales, though.
Yeah. Yes, Professor Von der Rohe, as I recall.
Well, so tell me, who were some of your favorite teachers then?
David Hemingway was probably number one. Now,
English.
Yeah, English teacher, and he and I really bonded because he also had a home in Italy, so we would talk about that a lot. There was David Holmes. There was Frau Hückig, that was our German teacher. I mean, this gal was a force to be reckoned with. If you did not pronounce the umlaut correctly, usually there was something thrown at you. Traunsteiner, Doc Rock. I have to say, I had a great relationship with Dean McMahon as well. I thought all of the professors, but also the administration, was very acclimated to their own challenges of managing all of these young Americans on foreign soil.
Mm.
Dormitory, of course, my dorm supervisor was Barry Weil. Yes, I had gotten written up several times for being too loud or breaking some rule or another.
Mm.
But when I think back on it, we might have thought at the time we were being treated unfairly. But yeah, when I look back on it, I think they could have really been much more harsh.
Yeah, no, I got a letter warning me for what? I just was looking through my yearbook the other day and I came across, some handwritten notes because I was getting ready for this interview, and I wrote down, this teacher suspended me. I've never been suspended. I don't remember why I was suspended from class. I have no idea. And I don't have any memory of it, but I'd written it in my yearbook. So he must have said, get out of class or something, go away, come back some other day.
Wow.
Yeah. So, we grew up overseas and we bridged multiple cultures. So German and American and Italian and so I know you talk about it and being a person of the world and stuff, but how did all those bridging of cultures influence you now, to made you who you are now? I mean, what makes you you now based on that bridging?
Okay. One thing I think is we're very internationally aware.
Mm, mm,
I I'm very interested in the affairs of the world and
mm,
keep myself up to speed on what's going on.
mm,
In terms of travel, I
mm,
have a wanderlust that needs to be satisfied. And quite frankly, one of the things I found is that this country, the United States, is so vast.
mm,
I was, I'm always so happy to do, like, even just last summer, my wife and I did a road trip from here in Massachusetts to San Antonio and back.
mm,
But we're hitting all of these major landmarks all the way down and then all the way back. We went through St. Louis and Oklahoma City, and then on the way back, we went through um, New Orleans, and then Smoky Mountain Parkway and the Blue Ridge Mountain Parkway, and is seeing this amazing country
mm.
that we live in almost through foreign eyes. And quite frankly, my ear is also always open. I don't know if this is with you. When you're walking around places that are in America and you hear foreign
Oh
languages,
yeah, 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 yeah.
you immediately are like, okay, okay.
Where
And
are you from? Shaka.
so
Yeah.
yeah, there's a curiosity. I will tell you, here in Boston, there's a little Italy.
Mm,
And
mm,
my wife and I are walking through, and I hear someone speaking not just Italian, Neapolitan dialect.
mm,
And
mm,
so I hop in. And next thing you know, we're fully engaged in this conversation. And and my wife is also, she also has some of that same curiosity
mm,
from me now, um, about different cultures and whatnot. Um, so I would say how it affects me now is wanting to explore,
mm.
constantly wanting to explore, constantly wanting to look to engage. If there's, I'm not talking about just the places that I've been. If whether it's Japanese or Chinese, or now granted with Bose, I got to travel the
Mm,
world,
mm.
and that travel was the best part of my job because it put me in a situation that I was so familiar with. I'm
Mm,
the new kid in town. I don't speak the local language,
mm.
but oh my goodness, there's so much history and culture to explore. Let's get into it.
Right, right, right. So I just want one sentence. We're wrapping up, but I want one sentence. If you were going to say one sentence about living on McGraw Kaserne, what is your one sentence?
I felt safe prepared, and knew all the do's and don'ts to thrive.
Very good. My one sentence would be, I could be myself, and people accepted that, whatever
Yeah.
that was. Yeah.
You
Well,
were in amongst a bunch of other people like you.
yeah, being ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to thank you, Dave, for sharing your memories about growing up in the military. I think that was very interesting, especially for our listeners and viewers, and also about a little bit about living on McGraw Kaserne. I only knew you from the Keller. I did want one really quick thing. I wanted you to give me a little vignette about Doc. He was the cook at the Keller, and he was always there. And I just want to know, you worked with him for years, what was he like?
He was really amazing.
Hmm.
So I can't remember his first name. His last name was Belton, but of course everyone called him Doc. And he had been in the military before. But the role that Doc played at the student union was to cook food. He didn't just cook any food. He cooked a lot of Southern food, whether it was ribs, his famous spaghetti and meatballs,
Yeah, I remember both
um,
of those.
his famous garlic bread. Now, I'm going to tell you just a brief story. There was one student, the kitchen was right down from the bar, so I could see everything that was going on. And I noticed this one student whose name was Nick Fox. And when there was plates of garlic bread put up, I noticed that he was taking them. And so, like, stealing them. So at one point, I come over and I'm like, okay, Nick, this is like the third time I've seen you do this, and I'm gonna have to boot you out and uh, not let you back in. And he goes, Dave, you don't understand. Here's the deal. I pay Doc for the garlic bread, but I have to steal it and him not see. It was a little game that they played. Now, what that told me was more about Doc than about Nick.
Uh,
That these were the things that he was a huge man. As a matter of fact, one of the first things told about to me about Doc, when you get your food, put the money down on the counter and leave your hand there so that you can see how small your hand is
yeah,
next
he
to
was a big
his.
guy. Yeah,
He
yeah.
was a big guy, but he was respectful. He loved the students. He had a long history there, and I think just was so dedicated to serving the students. It was truly amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I remember him vividly, and I remember all the food now that you mentioned it. Okay, well, we have to go because we've spent a long time here. We could talk all day, all
We
night.
could.
We could, but we have to uh cut it close now. And so I just wanted to let our listeners know that we appreciate them tuning into this, and we hope that this has been interesting. And you will be scrolling perpetually and in this exhibit, in 2025, this little video will just play. So you'll be there forever. And then we'll put it on our podcast too. But I wanted to thank you again for jumping in and joining me today. And thank you for all the stuff you did for us students at the Keller back in the day, and being my friend on Facebook. And thank you everyone for tuning in to this special episode of Host Nation Hospitality. So just David.
Sir, before I do my send off,
Hmm.
I just have to tell you how much I appreciate the work that you do in representing military families and the military and our country. And I don't know that enough gratitude can be shown to what you do, the focus that you bring, the service that you've given. So servus.
Well, Danke schön. Thank you.
Okay, bitte sehr.
All right.